Hi, I'm Heather Roberts,
And I'm Veronica Adams. We are 1852 Media.
and this is For Book's Sake. All right, everyone, welcome back. And you will see we have an amazing guest with us here today. Her name is Sabrina Baêta. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
It's close enough.
Close enough. Sabrina is here from Penn America. She's a senior program manager and with the freedom to read at Penn America. She engages in research and awareness building around censorship attacks on public K through 12 education, especially as it relates to literature, accessibility in libraries and classrooms. We are so excited to have Sabrina here with us today, and we are going to be talking about censorship and book bans, specifically in K through 12 schools, but also how it affects us as Americans just generally. Because even though a lot of the book bans is happening in schools and in classrooms, these do have effects on us, even if you do not have a child in school or you are not actively in school. So, welcome, Sabrina.
Yes, welcome.
Is there anything you'd like to add to your resume that I didn't cover?
No, definitely the resume is long enough, but I do love this general approach to looking at book bans because it really is, a lot of what we look at are school book bans, but libraries are under attack. Educational spheres, even public education as a concept, is under attack. So this absolutely affects all of us, and I think it affects our identities as Americans. As free expression country. So happy to be able to take that general lens.
Awesome. Well, first, tell us a little bit about Penn America. What is the mission of Penn America?
Yeah, so Penn America stands at the intersection of human rights and literature. So we were started over 100 years ago by writers in New York who were looking to basically keep their free expression rights, to be able to promote the right of people to write what they wanted to write, but also to read what they wanted to read and express themselves. And from that, we've grown over those 100 years to have both domestic and international lenses towards free expression. And for us, looking at the Freedom to Read team specifically, we're a relatively new team within Penn. I joined Penn 3 years ago now, and it took maybe another year for us to actually establish the team. But it fits in so perfectly with what we have always stood for, which is advocating for the rights of readers and writers.
No, that's amazing. And how does the Freedom to Read team, like, what do you guys do? What's your focus there?
Yeah, so we look at censorship in K through
Okay.
12 public education. Colloquially, I call us the book ban team. Probably call us the anti-book ban team because
Yeah.
I would say we're banning the books. No, but we are the book ban team because we are largely what we're looking at in censorship in K through 12 are book bans, and we're tracking some other trends now, but the movement really started with book banning, and we do a variety of public awareness campaign building to make people aware of this. We do research checking as to where the bans are happening, how they're happening, and then advocacy campaigns. Really, that looks like uplifting the grassroots groups that are already doing this work on the ground.
No, that's awesome. I mean, book bans specifically, I know Florida is a hotbed for book bans, but it's really happening across the United States. Would you say, I mean, I think I looked at your guys, I think I looked at the map of Penn America because you guys track. You guys are amazing trackers when it comes to book banning. And it's like Texas and Florida are the biggest states that have book ban concerns right now. Is there anywhere that has surprised you that book bans have popped up?
Yeah, so our latest report, Iowa and Florida, were up there. And really, a lot of people think of this as a red state problem.
Yeah.
When it's not. I'm actually seeing book bans across the country in blue and red districts and purple districts. And it is now we have 43 states that have book banning activity over the
Mm.
last 3 years, which is obviously the majority of states. And for the other ones, it's not even that they necessarily don't have some kind of censorship activity going on, but my tracking is completely based on public documentation. which means somebody has to be paying attention. Somebody has to be reporting that. I need to be getting that information for me to even be able to track the book bans that are happening. And also, if we think about, and maybe we'll get into it, the books that are most targeted, those have to be available in the first place. Like
Right.
libraries had to have diversified their collections to better represent the full population of this country in the first place for those
Yeah.
books to be banned. So there's a lot of different factors that can even impact the tracking of this, but it is absolutely happening all over the country.
Well, yeah, let's talk a little bit about what Penn America considers a book ban to be, right? Because a lot of people are like, well, what is a book ban? It's still available to me. I can still go buy it in the stores. It wasn't banned. What does that mean? Can you explain a little bit to our listeners who may not know what you consider a book ban?
Yeah, absolutely. I love this part because it's when I get to put my researcher hat on and talk about my
Yeah.
methodology, which we worked really, really hard on because we knew it had to be really strong to stand up to some of the attacks that we were going to get in reporting this. So for us, we track school book bans specifically. That's in K through 12 public schools. And a book ban is defined as creating any restricted or diminished access to a material that was previously available in a classroom or a library based on the content of that book. So, what we are saying, if you just decide to remove a book because that's your natural, weeding process for a library, that you're just doing that circulation, or the book is returned to you in two pieces and you have to replace that book, then that's not a ban. You're replacing that material oftentimes with the same material. But when there's a content, when the content of the material is the reason why you're removing it,
Yeah.
that is a ban. And why we do restricted or diminished access is because we believe any kind of censorship, any kind of obstacle that you're putting up to the material is creating a ban to how it was previously accessible. So if a book was never in a library, that does not count as a ban. I don't even know how you would start to track that. But
Yeah.
if a book was previously available, let's say Toni Morrison's Bluest Eye, and now it has been removed completely from a high school, that means that those high schoolers no longer have access. It is banned to them in that capacity. You can say, well, what if it was only 18 plus that could now read it? Well, it's still banned to those who are under 18. So that, to
Yeah.
me, we have different levels of bans that we show the severity of the ban because we do want to highlight that. But it's still counted as a ban. And then one of the biggest questions is ban pending investigation.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of our statuses. Basically, that means, okay, we've received a challenge for this book. I'm going to remove it while it is under review to see if we're going to keep the book or not keep the book. That is, some people may say that's not a ban. I'm just removing it to review it. Well, during the time when the book is removed, it is a ban. And also, we've seen this used as a soft kind of like silent under the table censorship. It's like, oh, okay, we've got these removals. We're just going to remove these 10 picture books, and then it takes a year to review them. Does it take a
Right.
year to
Yeah.
review, 10 picture books? So we've seen that over and over again, and that really led us to clue into the trends of censorship and the different ways you can censor a book, but try the book banners don't like the ban label. They
Right.
know it's not popular. They know it looks bad. So they will try to do anything to not call it a ban. But it's like, by all pretenses, by the application of it, this is now a ban.
Yeah, you still can't read it. I mean, Veronica and I were talking about the lawsuits in Florida, specifically Ron DeSantis's laws and the challenges. I believe Penn America is part of that lawsuit, and that was one of the biggest things, the soft ban, if you will,
Yes.
the pending ban, because the argument there is really over the process of how they are reviewing books. And the fact is that they're taking these books off the shelves without any real type of challenge. It's just one parent who says, I don't like it. And so they take it off the book for everybody, or I'm
Yeah.
sorry, take it off the shelf for everybody. And then it's in this limbo for an unknown period of time
Yeah.
because there's no real process. It's not like experts are reviewing these titles, librarians aren't reviewing them. They've not indicated any type of actual process to get the book put back on
Yeah.
the shelves.
The claim is it's just it's a constructive ban without any sort of review process whatsoever, because the process allows those books to just sort of hang out in book purgatory while no one looks at them or evaluates them.
Right. And then the
No.
question also is, as I was talking about before, who is looking at them? They they have no real committee of experts who are looking at these books to decide, or even lawyers, like, are they obscene? Do they pass the legal tests to be put back on the shelves? Do they have any type of intrinsic artistic or social value, with those tests that are available through the Supreme Court currently. Um, we say currently.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think you bring up a great point with that I really like to highlight, because I'm looking specifically at school libraries. These are not, in no library can anyone just put a book on a shelf and be like, I have decided this book is now publicly available. Public libraries don't work like that. So,
right.
but school libraries especially don't work like that. They have expert librarians who oftentimes have master's degrees in this. And if you're
Yeah.
getting a degree in library science, you're not doing it for the fame and the fortune. Like,
You're not.
you are doing it because, and if you're going to a school for that, like, you are doing it because you inherently love literature and love being able to provide that to students, and being able to cultivate that kind of collection for their educational and emotional needs. Like, that is why you are doing it. So those are the people who are selecting the materials. Well, those used to be the people who were selecting the materials to go into schools. So it's not, none of these books fit the legal definition of obscenity.
Right.
And the decision making power is being pulled away from the librarians who are trained for this, who are also trained to be impartial, to be able to
Right.
select the materials that were going to have educational and emotional value to their students and be able to help them through this process of growing up, right? And now we're putting that in the hands of one community member or parent who has ideological differences with a title. Like,
Yeah.
you can see how that becomes a huge problem. Also, there's always been a challenge process. You could always challenge
Correct.
materials that were available in your library, or if you didn't want your student to read something in curriculum, you could always ask for alternate assignments. But that discussion, that discourse that used to exist between community member and parent, and then the teacher and the librarian, is being completely skipped over for these like big displays of obscene materials and indoctrination and all these kind of buzzwords that are really just covering up the fact that these attacks are meant to dismantle the system. It's not just one challenge to a book, it's 100.
Right.
The policies aren't standing up because the policies weren't written for this kind of bad faith attack to be
Right.
happening in freaking school libraries of all places. Like, the little librarian is who you're going after, but I think it's purposeful. They're going after the vulnerable in that moment,
Yeah.
and the people who had best intentions and weren't ready for an attack.
Right. And I think you make a good point. It doesn't have to be a parent who's challenging this book. It doesn't have to have, it can just be a community member who's decided that they don't like the book. They don't have to have a child in the school system. So the other side likes to talk a lot about parental rights here. And, I'm a parent. Veronica's a parent. I mean, we all about parental rights. But at the same time, we recognize other people also have their own parental rights. And that's the issue that's being trampled upon. And as a community library, in so much that it's in the school, in the community, not obviously the community public library, one community member who doesn't have any sort of stake in it, raising a stink about a book they haven't even read, is a big problem to me, and restricting access for everyone else in that school. So I appreciate you guys doing the hard work here because it's so nuanced.
It is, and thank you for raising that, because with parental rights, whose parental rights? Whose
Right.
parental rights are we talking about? There's also, when people have had given the option to opt their students out of the library, in or out, the vast majority, in the 90s somethings percent, keep it. Like,
Yeah.
this is a fabricated moral panic over a problem that never actually existed, because a lot of these books too have been on shelves for years, and like
Right.
suddenly we're noticing that Toni Morrison is an author. suddenly we're noticing that there's more queer books on the shelf. Like, where is this actually coming from?
Well, and I think that you bring up a point. So let's talk about the types of books that are being actually
Yes.
challenged here.
Yes. What is actually being challenged?
So, time and time again, our research has shown that marginalized identities, particularly people and characters of color within books, books about race and racism, books that feature the LGBTQ plus community, and or have themes of it, are being targeted. In addition to that, we've also seen themes that we consider to be the human experience, themes that are sometimes difficult to be able to understand even as adults, but also as students, things like death and grief, violence and abuse, but important topics that I always say these are topics that they wait for no one. Death and grief
Right.
will not meet a child at 18, and suddenly, that's when you have to deal with that in your life. So having those books available to students who need them most is really important. Another one, and probably the one you've seen in headlines and heard all the rhetoric, is books with sex and sexual content. The
Right.
majority of these books that are being banned in high school, maybe some higher level middle school, mostly high school. And the reality is, those students and a lot of the parents of those students want materials that address sexual experiences, both positive sexual experiences, stories about consent, about self empowerment, but then also the different violent aspects of it, what sexual assault looks like and what sexual violence looks like, so that you have the
Right.
tools to be equipped to know going forward when this is likely. In our society, sexual experiences are a part of the culture. They just are. So
Right.
allowing students to have an introduction to them through a book, I don't know about you, much softer introduction to any
Much
kind of
so.
topic than anything happening in real life, And that's one of the things, it's almost this idea that you know, it's indoctrination or this introduction is going to corrupt our students. And I'm like, you should be the people most advocating for the book introduction of this
Right.
concept, like, and these are also, again, materials that were selected by librarians. So this is not where most teenagers go to for sex advice, which is the internet. And
Right.
Right. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity to actually invite discussion with students on these topics. It's not that parents are not being shut out of the conversation by having those books available in the library. They're actually being invited in by having those materials there. But it does require that, connection to actually happen. So, one of the things I also say, and I just want to plug, the point of education is critical thinking. It's to agree and to disagree. It's to be exposed to a bunch of different ideas and to be able to learn how to form your own thoughts on that, because that is a learning process.
Yeah.
So if you are somebody with an ideology that you are worried about, what your student is being exposed to, that's a great opportunity for you to have that discussion, to also be able to voice why you agree or disagree. And I say that for certain life topics. I don't say that as an excuse to impose racist or homophobic ideals. I'm sorry, gonna draw the line there. You don't have
Yeah.
the right to decide to rewrite history, and you don't have the right to decide to erase the queer community from books. So that is where I'm like, all right, that is what's real in society. And because students are being exposed to what their peers, are facing and what their peers' experiences are, they, as students, have a right to have that information.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's exactly why books are so important, especially in school libraries, allowing kids of all ages, but especially in high school, to be able to explore different topics and do it in a safe way. I mean, that is where so many introductions to different topics happen for students. And listen, they're going to find things on the internet, as you brought up. The internet is in their pockets. I mean, it's just wild to me that you're hitting the books. I mean, they're also going after the internet now in different ways, but the internet is available. It is prevalent. If a child wants something, all they have to do is open up their phone and ask for it. So the fact that we're going into these books that all, especially like Toni Morrison and things, actual works of literature, I don't think that's the issue. Okay. I really don't feel like that's the problem, because a person who's reading that is likely doing it for some type of introspection or enjoyment of reading or just trying to learn about a different topic in a way that is, I think, more beneficial than just typing through Google.
No,
But
absolutely.
that's just me. That's my 2 cents. Okay, so let's go to the next question. What can people do to combat this in their communities?
I also love this question, mostly because when I started doing this research 3 years ago, the number one question I would get is, "Are book bans happening?" It took a while to even convince, especially I think an American audience, that book bans were real and they were happening in our country. And then once a lot of people started speaking up, started sharing their experiences, a lot of research started coming out. Then the question I got is, "What can I do to help?" And I'm like, that to me is like the basis of humanity. Is our next question is always, okay, what can I? There's a problem. I want to help. And for me, like, a lot of different causes, go local. It can be very overwhelming to look at the scope of the entire movement and be like, how do I stop this on a national level? Um, but there's so much you can be doing at your local level. And cluing into what's happening in your backyard is the first step. Figure out what's happening. If you have a connection to schools, figure out what's happening in your school board meetings. Public libraries are also being attacked right now. Figure out what's happening in your public library meetings. They have boards and elected members as well. Figure out who you're voting in. Talk to your librarians. And I always say you can find your brand of advocacy. Writing out a speech and going to a school board may terrify you. If public speaking is not your thing, don't make public speaking your brand of advocacy. But maybe you are really good at baking cookies. And like you are going to go to the local library and you're going to give your librarians cookies and say, "I know it's a hard time right now, but I support you. Also, by the way, that pride display you've got going on, love that. Let's keep that up." One of the things I say is you can be really proactive with this, because the flood of complaints often come all at once because it is an organized campaign. It's like suddenly they'll get five complaints on the same book. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Again, usually from a host of different people who may not even be connected to the community. So you want to be proactive in saying, if you just checked out a great book that you think have topics that may cause it to be banned, when you turn it back in, make sure you have some kind of official record, an email, a written note that says, "Wow, I'm so glad you made this book available." Because when those five complaints come in, if there's seven that say, "Thank you so much for having this book," that's huge for a librarian. That's huge for a
Yeah.
library. You can do that for full displays. Like I mentioned, the Pride display, it's Black History Month. This is your
Yeah.
time to say, okay, if there isn't a display in your library, ask for one. They can put that on record too. And oftentimes, librarians, these are all public servants. They are trying to serve the public and what the public is asking for. And sometimes we forget we need to ask for these things if we think it might just be inherent. But we're living in a time where it's not. Like, we have to be asking, we have to be vocal about what we want our communities to reflect. So I would say find your brand of advocacy and start at the local level with your own community. Of course, you can also see what different organizations, both, there's always going to be some kind of parent or state level right to read. Reading is a right. We don't get we get creative and don't get, but we like write and read as words. So Google that in your state, and you're likely to find some kind of group that you can get involved with. And if you don't know where to go past that, you can always reach out to organizations like Penn America, the National Coalition Against Censorship, American Library Association, every library that are doing this work and that are always looking for support. And oftentimes on their websites have some first steps of what you can do.
That's amazing. I definitely, I'm thinking about my own library. I mean, we're here in Vermont, and Vermont is generally one of the less, I don't know, we're
Restrictive.
pretty, yeah, restrictive. We're a pretty safe state when it comes to challenges and book bans and the thing and the like. But I also haven't been to my local library recently. So it would be a really good idea to go over there and just let them know, hey, I see you and you're doing a good job and we appreciate you. because they probably don't get that very frequently. I mean, you think about restaurants, right? Then it's the same sort of thing. They're only getting the bad reviews. They're hearing the bad news, not always the good news. So we have to, as a society, be better about asking for positive things and reminding people that they're doing good work when they are doing so, especially in a public servant role, for
No,
sure.
absolutely.
Um, let's see I think this is great. We talked about this a little bit, but how does censorship affect our education system and then the community as a whole?
Oh, love this question too. Education. I mean, okay, and I'm speaking as somebody who was an educator, who received a lot of education, who sought a lot of education, who's privileged enough to have it. But education is the foundation of a democratic society. Like, our democracy is built on the fact that we are not at times always successfully, but trying to offer equal education to everyone. And public education is under attack. Both, yes, book bans are almost a really kind of clear cut example. I think that's why people grabbed onto it, of what an attack on public ed looks like. But there are murkier examples. There are policies under attack. There's funding under attack that it's coded in a bunch of big words, and you don't fully understand the connection between cutting this source of funding and how it's going to negatively impact public education. But it is paramount to uphold those values and as a society, to continue to support public education. We can have frustrations with it. We can say we can do this better. We can serve more of our students. But the idea, we still have to fight for the idea of public education. And that's something that I think we're almost taking for granted, that we're
Mhm.
saying, okay, this is the United States. We're always going to have that. Well, it was also, this is the United States. We're always going to have free expression and not have book bans and not look like a 1940s, you know what? So, like, that's not happening. Like, that is no longer actually inherent, and decided on. Like, there are a lot of people who are actually working really hard to strip away the idea of public education and the idea of opportunity for all, and they're hiding it within different types of language, voucher systems.
School choice.
If you see school choice, if you see
Yeah.
voucher system, do your research. What does that look like? School choice for whomst? Like,
Yeah.
because it might not be who you think, or it might be exactly who you think, and you should be paying attention to that. So, um, as a community, to create opportunity for all, that means we have to spread out resources. We have to be okay with that. Like, that means
Yeah.
that if you have privilege and you have resources, please consider actually spreading them out and not hoarding them. We have enough of a society that we don't have to hoard resources and materials and knowledge. We should be spreading it out. The point of having those is to spread it out, and that is an intrinsic kind of value that I think is almost separated from this idea of, like, the practical, like, voucher school choice concerns. But
Mhm.
I think it is who we decide to be as a community and as a society. And I like to believe in still building the America that I view we can be, that is an inherent value of who we are as a democratic society.
That's a really good point. Let's see. Can you give us an update on any of the lawsuits Penn America is currently engaged in?
I cannot.
I
I'm
I
legally.
figured I'd ask. I
The
mean, you're
standard
here.
litigation answer.
No, I appreciate the question. My legal team will get me in trouble.
Of
I will not speak
course.
to them, but I will say I am glad that so many people are using all the tools that they can to fight this.
We are too. And I will just say that we are thrilled that Penn America has decided to take up this cause and has been so involved in this because it is such a worthy cause. And, we can sit here, Veronica and I will talk about, the lawsuits and we'll break them down and read through them. But it's nice to know that there are people out there fighting the good fight and doing it
Yeah.
on the ground. Um,
No, and you bring up a great point. So many more people are actually fighting the book bans than fighting for them.
yeah.
But we're just on the harder side. It's harder to keep what you have than to take away what somebody else has. It actually is.
Yeah.
So we need the continued support, but it's a vocal minority that are doing this. So I always
Hmm.
say, like, we don't actually need that big a group of very vocal, also minority, like, to fight against it. But we have so many causes to turn our attention to, rightfully, that it ends up getting split. So I'm really grateful when people decide free expression, decide books
Yeah.
are going to be their cause, because that is a choice. You're choosing to put your resources there when there's a lot of worthy causes out there to do that with. So thank you. It's like even your podcast. Thank you for deciding to do this.
And thank you to our listeners who are deciding to listen to this
Yeah.
as well. I mean, well, I know we're on a little thank train right now, but truly, like, books are important. And a lot of our listeners are writers themselves. And, without organizations like Penn America, your ability to write could be taken away from you. Your ability to publish, obviously you can always write, at least right now. But your ability to publish and get your books out there and get your thoughts shared with others, that could be severely restricted. And that's a real challenge that we're dealing with now. It's concerning.
Yes. And in a lot of ways has been with the soft censorship and the silence and the self censorship, especially a lot of writers who are trying to get their things kind of off the ground, or trying to get more accolades and notice, or try to get paid for their work so they can,
Hmm.
do this more sustainably. They know what topics are not going to be so popular and publishable, but and that's a really hard decision. That's a really hard line to walk, of wanting knowing that your work is going to be impactful if it's read. And so trying to get it
Yeah.
read. But to that, I also say, like, I more than ever, I see writers as the record keepers of this time. When our institutions are not going to document and catalog what's actually happening, who we are, the complexity of our own identities and experiences, authors will. And authors have always, regardless of whether their works have ever seen the light of day or not, they are the ones who have tackled that issue for us as a society. So for me, in fighting, I fight for these stories because I'm fighting for myself. I'm fighting for my identities, my communities, but I'm fighting for the idea that we can continue on with that hope. They can
Hmm.
carry this hope forward, and from like that is like the little kernel that keeps us going in the face of like terrible, terrible attacks. And I truly believe that hope is so much more powerful than any bigotry, hatred, anything they can throw at us, because that hope is never ending. Like, it can never be
Yeah.
extinguished. They can never fully take it away from us. But the more we can be vocal, the more we can write, the more we can put that information out there and say, I'm with you, I see you, to different people, the more it empowers us to be able to stand up for each other.
Yeah, for sure. Veronica and I are both literary agents as well. So, we see books that come in and we're always championing different titles to different publishers. And that's been a real concern for me. And I'm sure, Veronica, you've had this
Of
concern as
course.
well.
Yes.
As we're going to pitch to different publishers, queer stories specifically, is there going to be a curtailment, even by editors,
Yeah.
even maybe not consciously, right, but subconsciously, of wanting to pick up some of these titles simply because of the current state and the climate that we're in, which is that type of self-censorship as you were talking about. And it's definitely a concern for both of us as we're going to pitch some of these titles, reaching out to these publishers. And would you agree? You're agreeing, Veronica? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it goes beyond just the example you give of queer stories, but stories by and about authors and characters of color, for example,
Yeah.
people from any sort of marginalized community, as both social and political climate change. It's easy to fear, and I think anticipate even, that the minds of publishing professionals is going to follow that current thought, and
Right.
that there will be less risk taken on what would be seen, I guess, as protest pieces, right, of standing in democracy and allowing people to proudly express any sort of in this particular case, countercultural stance about the right of people to exist, or the facts of history, or self-identity, and all of the tough topics that, they continue to attack in schools and in some places public libraries too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I've seen that too. I've seen that in canceled author visits. I've seen
Yeah.
that, in materials that were never bought. I've had a lot of authors say, my previous book was widely circulated in school libraries, and now this one refuses to be picked up. So, and I think it's really, really difficult. But part of this campaign is to create a tabooness around these topics. That
Mm-hmm.
stories where about characters of color, even just like maybe it's about race and racism, but maybe they're just on the cover. Like it's a queer story. A pride flag is now, it is creating this aspect, even subconsciously for us, that it's taboo. And I think
Right.
we have to form an inoculation against that we have to say, like, that we really have to be critical about thinking about this as like, there's nothing with this story. There's nothing wrong. Even if you're going to bring it up and somebody's going to shoot it down, you need to keep your own, like, and that it's hard for me because I part of my job is to be able to anticipate what's going to get banned, anticipate
Right.
things that are happening, but I can't ever actually let it get internalized within me that
Mm-hmm.
because other people have an issue with this does not mean I have to adhere to any of that tabooness. I'm going to get a no every single time. I'm going to keep bringing it up, but I don't have to be the one to self-censor. I don't have to be, if
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with this material, if there, if I see value in it, if I, even if I may be uncomfortable with it, but it is bringing truth, then
Right.
it is my job to be able to stay open to that. But I think it is difficult. It's almost like what a lot of Americans are facing in their dinner table conversations of like, I don't want to bring up this topic. I don't think
Right.
there's anything wrong with it, but this friend, this parent, this whatever might bring it up. Be naive. Like like use that to your advantage of being like, what do you mean, like, trans athletes should be banned from sports? That's a woman. Like that shouldn't,
Right.
like, outline your problems for me, and I'm going to tell you why only 9 athletes in the NCAA are affected by this. Like, like,
Yeah.
get your facts ready because you're going to need them. But I think creating that kind of inoculation to it and not letting it become a taboo subject is
Yeah.
so important.
Yeah.
Continuing to fight the culture war, so to speak, and
Yeah,
being willing to have
exactly.
a voice for what you believe is right. Yeah.
Exactly. And you don't even have to be like, I always try to do like assumed that everybody's at my level
Right.
and be
Right.
like confused why they're not. Because I'm like,
Yeah.
this doesn't even have to be like, I'm like, it's not political. Tell me how this is, trans lives are not political. They
Right.
just deserve rights because they're humans going through a human experience. That is it. Like, we don't have to
And
argue particulars. We don't have to get nuanced. We don't have to, I don't have to use their rhetoric against them. Like, it can be that simple.
yeah. No, I totally agree. All right. Well, we have to wrap up, sadly. But I'm going to end on this question because I'm dying to know, what is your favorite banned book?
That is a really great question. So I am a fan. I'm queer and Brazilian. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of Brazilian lit out there that's not like by Brazilian authors, obviously, which is not getting banned because it's in Portuguese. But which is not widely featured. But Casey McQuiston,
Mm.
leaning into the queerness. I love a romance book. When
So
I
do
was
we.
Yes, when I was in my straight phase, as I call it, which was before my awareness, I read so many romance books. By the way, no amount of straight romances made me straight, so no amount of
Yeah.
queer romances are going to make anyone queer.
You are so right.
So believe me, I tried. So no,
Veronica and I always joke, we're like, listen, we're straight, not necessarily because we want to be. Like,
Yes.
have you seen the option? Like,
I literally had this conversation with my 82-year-old father this past weekend. If I could choose to be queer in any way, shape, or form, I would. Because
queer is
have
a
you
mindset. We'll
seen
invite you in on our
modern men?
You're
Like,
right.
and of course, not all men, right? But
Yeah.
yeah, like it's an interesting divide that we're in here in cishet land, I guess. And
Yes. That's the
if
thing.
I could choose another path for myself, I would, because I suspect it's a little bit easier and much more comfortable behind closed doors, out of the public eye, where it's just you and your partner or your private life. So,
Oh yeah, given the
yeah.
choice, my lesbian lifestyle, which is one of the book banners, wanted to ban a book because it promoted the lesbian lifestyle. So now I desperately want a hat that says lesbian lifestyle promoter. Like if that was a job title, I
I
would.
can
That's my
I
career
can
right
make
there.
that hat for you, totally. Like,
Parting podcast gift. Yes, please.
yeah.
Absolutely.
But I'm sorry. So Casey McQuiston,
Casey
they're your favorite.
McQuiston is, yes, one of my favorites. Particularly Who Kissed Sarah Wheeler. I think that's the title of the book. I really love that one. And then I actually have the newest one right here. You can't see it because this is a podcast, but The Pairing by Casey
Yes.
McQuiston, which I think is going to be a lot of kind of there's got some non-binary representation, which I am she/they pronouns, so I really appreciate that, and I think it's going to be a lot of kind of like queer fun mix-up, like
It's gonna be awesome
within it. So not banned yet. I'm not sure it's ever going to make it onto school shelves, but I am in the midst of The Pairing.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Still so important that it's being published and championed, though.
Yes. Yes. We love Casey McQuiston. And Veronica, do you have a favorite banned book?
Oh God. Okay. So the way back, the importance, this may be actually a cautionary tale for the other side. I found Margaret Atwood at the tender age of 14 or 15. And so The Handmaid's Tale has been with me for 2/3 of my life, and has been and will always probably be my favorite banned book.
Yeah. I tend to also go for classics. I mean, Handmaid's Tale is definitely up there. Catcher in the Rye, I love for some reason. I don't know why Holden. I love Holden. I know a lot of people don't, but
Your angsty inner teenagers like just
yes. Perks of being a Wallflower, also a classic that really resonated with me in my teenage years, and I feel like should be available for other teenagers to resonate with. And I hear is also being at the cusp of bans, and really any Jodi Picoult book. So
Jodi,
Jodi, but who I love has been very, very actively outspoken about book bans specifically, and her books, all books being banned. And just the fact that she's taken this platform and her platform and really has been elevating that. I just can't say enough good things about her for doing so. Really applaud that effort.
More authors with her level of privilege to speak out and advocate for others in their community and for their readers too.
Jodi is a real one. We get to do a lot with her at Penn, and she is absolutely the real deal.
Yeah. And honestly, I hate to say it, but the reason I know how to say her name correctly is because of her outspokenness with book bans. And I thank you, Jodi, for talking about it and saying your name. And I think we all went through a collective, oh my God, I've been saying your name wrong for forever. But so my apologies to Jodi, but here we are. Well, thank you so much, Sabrina.
Yes,
This
Sabrina,
has been amazing. Yeah.
Can I actually ask one light parting question? If someone wants to get involved with Penn America or support Penn America's efforts, what's the best way for them to do that?
So penn.org will get you everything you need. There's an issues area for book bans. There's an issues area for everything free expression under the sun, essentially. So you can get involved. There's letters you can sign. Of course, there's donations. I will plug, there's so many local groups doing this as well. My development team is like, stop talking, please. But there's so many local groups doing this as well, particularly Florida Freedom to Read Project and the Texas Freedom to Read Project.
Super important right
states. Now. Yeah. They also have websites and information online, if you Google them, for how you can donate and how you can help. And also look at your own state and see if there's different types of organizations. Usually at this point, there's a state level organization. And look to see if you are in a state that might support open shelves and might fight against censorship. Check if there's any right to read legislation, and write your legislator. Can I say that? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Support
please.
right to read legislation.
Yes.
That's what I'll say instead. So just be aware of what's happening in your state, but also consider donating to Penn or donating your time to Penn. That would be great. But please support those local organizations where that money will actually stretch even further.
Awesome.
Again, development is like, please stop talking. But I am
also donate to Penn.
Yes. Maybe split your donation. Or double it for that matter if you're in a position where you can do that.
There you go.
No, thank you.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Sabrina. We could probably talk about this for another hour, but sadly we have to end. But truly, thank you so much for coming on. We've learned so much. We hope that the listeners have as well. And please reach out to Penn America. Give them your donations. They definitely need them right now to help support the ongoing fight against censorship and book bans in America. And next time, we will be back to talking about another legal issue. And so stay updated for that. And we'll see you soon. This has been For Book's Sake.